And let's get to it up in New England, where Cam Newton, back at practice after a mandatory 5-day absence due to a COVID protocol misunderstanding. Silly reporters thought they would actually get Bill Belichick to elaborate on the stated reasons for Cam Newton's absence. Let's have a listen to Bill Belichick yesterday trying to fend off those who may be trying to get to the truth.
Misunderstanding on the Newton thing. I don't quite get. Newton was gone for you for 5 days, and it was characterized as a misunderstanding. Was he told he could go, or did he not know the rule, or did you not know the rule?
Yeah, don't really have anything to add, Dan. You released a statement. I think that covered it as thoroughly as we can without, getting into a lengthy thing. So let's leave it at that.
Okay, it's just, for us, it allows the possibility that he either went without permission or someone didn't know the rule, which is very unlike you guys. And I know it's important to be at practice, and he's a pivotal guy in your team. So it leaves us a little bit out there as to the motivation for why he did this, and if he knew, and if you knew, or if he went against team rules.
No, he didn't go against team rules, but there was a misunderstanding, and it's exactly what I said it was in the statement.
So he was unaware he would lose the 5 days?
It's exactly what I said it was in the statement.
Yeah, the problem is the statement is fairly vague. And Peter, I don't know this, but I think what happened here was fairly simple. The misunderstanding was that Cam Newton, even though he probably had been told many times that as an unvaccinated player, thou shalt be tested every day at the team facility, he thought it was good enough to get tested somewhere else, wherever he went. And I believe, and this is the only way it makes sense, the Patriots assumed, yeah, okay, you can go out of town for whatever medical treatment you needed, but you get tested before you leave, day one, you go, spend the night, come back, get tested, and that counts. You don't skip the second day and just run to a drugstore wherever you are and get a COVID test and say, hey, I'm negative, all right, I'm good to go. That's the only reasonable explanation based upon the very vague statement the Patriots gave us.
Absolutely. It's what I was thinking all along, Mike, that clearly Cam Newton knew that he had to get tested every day. So if you have to get tested every day, the NFL has made it very, very clear. You have to get tested on site. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And that's why, obviously, what had to have happened is that Cam Newton must have gotten tested somewhere else, or perhaps even skipped a test somewhere else. You just don't know. But clearly, he did not test every day at the Patriots facility.
And this was an issue you flagged months ago, and it relates to the bye week, which is scattered throughout the course of the regular season for the players. If you're vaccinated, you can leave. If you're not vaccinated, you can't leave. And it's even more immediate than that. It's become clear in recent weeks that there's a mini bye on the immediate horizon in lieu of week 4 of the preseason. If you're vaccinated, you can go enjoy Labor Day weekend somewhere else. If you're not vaccinated, you got to show up every day and be tested. And I think the league is hoping that these little mini realizations and lessons learned, that you never know which one is going to eventually tip the scales in favor of getting vaccinated. But I think just little dribs and drabs like this of information and realization, I think that's one of the reasons why the vaccination rate keeps slowly creeping up as players understand the true and full implications of being vaccinated versus not being vaccinated.
Mike, there are players in this league who feel like they have been held hostage in order to get them vaccinated. You know, that they basically have been threatened and whipped and cajoled into getting the vaccination. Players who did not want to get the vaccination. But those who don't have the vaccination and who haven't been vaccinated, the first big moment will come next Thursday. Many coaches next week will practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, let's say. And then players who are fully vaccinated will be allowed to go wherever they want for the next 4 days. And many of them will go back to their college campuses, maybe stand on the sidelines at college football games or whatever, or just go somewhere for 4 days. And then teams will be back mostly the following Monday at practice, maybe Tuesday. So this is a golden time of year for players. You get a break after training camp of about 4 days, and the unvaccinated players do not get that break. They have to report every morning to their facility, mostly before 8 a.m., get the test, get back in their car, go home, await the results of the test, and then come back exactly the same way the next day. So that is one of the ways that teams hope that they're going to encourage players to get vaccinated. But, Mike, I'll tell you one other thing. One coach on this trip told me that, look, we have had 9 programs since the spring with our players. 9 different things. We've either had speakers come in, the NFL, an epidemiologist, somebody, talking to the players. And my human resources person came to me the other day and said, okay, here's the next plan, blah, blah, blah. And he held up his hand and he goes, I'm done. We're finished here. Our players now have to bear the responsibility. Those who aren't vaccinated, they're going to have to bear the responsibility of whatever happens, happens. We are going to have to bear that responsibility. But it's time to coach football. So there's going to be no more programs inside this team.
Well, and at a certain level, it makes a ton of sense because at a certain point, you're talking to a wall. You're not going to change anyone's mind by whoever it is that is put up there, in large part because of the disinformation that has infected the thinking of a lot of people in the country, and some of those people play for NFL teams. Peter, the mere fact that there is a clear and obvious link to availability to play every Sunday, and if we didn't know it before Cam Newton, we should have known it before Kellen Mond and Kirk Cousins. And the reality that you're going to be tested every day, including day of game, and it's not going to be like last year where the results don't come back until after your game's over. They're doing it all on site. You'll know 3 hours or more before kickoff whether or not you can play, because if you're unvaccinated, you have to be tested the morning of the game. And with such a clear link to being able to play, when you consider how players line up out the door for Toradol shots, which numb the body, and that's not good as it relates to current injuries and maybe future injuries, and which has long-term health effects that are proven and established, they'll gladly take a Toradol shot, and they refuse to do something else like this that enhances their availability and that is safe and effective. I've never seen anything like it, and I never would have dreamed that football coaches would be unable to extend their ability to tell their players what to do at all times and get them to do this. It's amazing to me that so many NFL football coaches have been unsuccessful to get their guys to do what their coaches want them to do.
Mike, in conversations with coaches, players, general managers, agents in the last month, I believe there are 3 reasons for this, for what you're just saying. Number one, you talk about the disinformation. Players hear from the teams, from experts, from whoever comes in to do these programs. They hear, you got to get the vaccine, you should get it, it's best for the country, it's best for your family, all that. Many of them go home and their wives will tell them, don't get it. Their father, their mother, their best friends don't get it. It doesn't do any good. It's bad for you. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the results are going to be in the future. So that is one thing, mixed messaging. Number 2, and I think this is really, really important. There are many players who have personal trainers away from the team. Some players have sleep specialists. Some players have all these private medical people, doctors, trainers, to take care of every aspect of their health. Those people are, in essence, in many cases, gurus over the player. And that, in some cases, is holding players back. And I'd say, finally, the other thing that's holding players back is that around the country right now, if you're a football player and you say you're not doing it, you're like Cole Beasley. I'm convinced that Cole Beasley would rather not play football and not make his whatever $8 or $9 million if he was told the only way you can play football is to get the vaccine. Mike, players are dug in. And that's why I think the coach who said, I'm not doing it anymore, I'm not going to get anywhere with him. Mike Zimmer told me, it doesn't do me any good anymore. Kirk Cousins is absolutely dug in. So those are the reasons why this is happening.
In hindsight, I wonder if the NFL wishes it had pushed harder to get a vaccine mandate for players. I think if those negotiations were happening under the current climate with full FDA approval for the Pfizer vaccine, it may have been easier. And there's been a skirmish between the league and the union as to whether or not the league wanted mandates. The league says it did. The union says it didn't. The reality is this: the league knows the union was never going to agree to it for fear of the kind of uprising from a very small percentage of players that could have toppled D. Smith, the NFLPA executive director. But on top of that, whatever it was going to take by way of a concession at the bargaining table, because that's how it would have happened, the league wasn't going to make any concession. The league wasn't going to give the union something else it wanted to get a mandate. So they came up with this system that was aimed at cajoling the players into doing it, creating all these benefits for doing it and detriments for not doing it. And I think they're exasperated that they didn't get 100% voluntary choice by creating a situation where it's a no-brainer. You do it, and you still have about 7% right now of players across the league who haven't done it.
Mike, I talked to somebody early on in this process with very close ties to the top of the NFL. And he said there's a very simple reason why there's not going to be a mandatory vax program in the NFL. And that is that who knows who it would be. 1, 2, or 3 megastars, quarterbacks most likely. 1, 2, or 3 of them would say, I'm not getting vaccinated. And you know what? I'm going to sue you. And I'm going to make my money this year by not playing football because I'll win this lawsuit. So, and imagine if you are, let's just say, the Minnesota Vikings, all right? And your quarterbacks, there's a mandatory vaccine thing. They got problems beyond Kirk Cousins. But if there's a mandatory vaccine and Kirk Cousins doesn't play, then their quarterback, if they had to plan for that this year, their quarterback is going to be Kellen Mond or one of those other guys who you never heard of at the end of their roster at quarterback. So even though the Vikings are tearing their hair out about this, about their quarterback not being vaccinated, they would rather have an unvaccinated Kirk Cousins than a vaccinated Kellen Mond be the quarterback of this team.
Yeah, the other Vikings quarterbacks are guys you wouldn't want to come to your apartment in Brooklyn. Contrast with guys who won't come.
Oh, they could come in. I'm a nice guy.
Including Aaron Rodgers, who, unlike a surprising number of starting quarterbacks who have sent plenty of messages that make it clear they're not vaccinated, including flat out saying they're not vaccinated, here's Rodgers from yesterday admitting that he is.
Yeah, I've been immunized. There's a lot of conversation around it, around the league, and a lot of guys who have made statements and have made statements, owners who made statements. There's guys on the team that haven't been vaccinated. I think it's a personal decision. I'm not going to judge those guys. There's guys who have been vaccinated that have contracted COVID. So it's an interesting issue.
Yeah, it was an opportunity for him to use his platform to maybe convince 1 or 2 of his teammates, and maybe he's doing it privately. He doesn't want to make it a public issue, but you could just see his hesitation, Peter, early on. He didn't even want to use the word vaccinated. He said immunized. He knows that word itself has become a hot button. But the bottom line is, if The coach isn't going to change a guy's mind. The starting quarterback isn't going to change a guy's mind either. If people are dug in, you're only going to cause problems if you try to go to them and talk sense into them, because as far as they're concerned, you're speaking a language from a different planet. You're not talking sense.
You know, two things, Mike. Number one, I thought it was interesting when Ron Rivera talked to Albert Breer and basically said that one of his players came up to him and said, "Hey, coach, I'm getting the vaccine." "Oh, great, great. Yeah, you know, my wife and, you know, we're having a baby, and I just want to make sure that, you know, we're all safe and everything like that." And I'm sure what's going through Rivera's mind and all that, he said, wow, I mean, now we see. I've had cancer. I am really in danger if I get COVID of getting really, really ill, even though I've had the vaccine. And so that is one thing. And I think the one other thing, Mike, I had a conversation with an admitted anti-vaxxer on this trip. The only way this conversation happened is that I said, I just want to try to understand. I just want to have a conversation. Not going to write about it, not going to, and look, no names, no anything here. But I said, you know, the one thing that really bothers me about this, aside from the obvious, and we're not going to agree on this, so there's no sense in going back and forth. But the one thing that bothers me is when players will say it's a personal decision. A personal decision? A personal decision does not necessarily hamstring an NFL franchise if that personal decision causes that player to miss 2 games. And if that personal decision causes, let's say, if it's a quarterback, causes his team to go 0-2 in those 2 games and the team to miss out on the playoffs, that's not a personal decision. And so this player basically said, you know, you're probably right. I think in the future I'm going to call it a private decision. That's correct. It is not a personal decision. It's very technically a personal decision, but a personal decision is not one that, that has no effect on whatever, millions of people and a franchise worth billions of dollars.
I agree with you completely. Peter, personal decision just became the label that was used by those who don't want to talk about it because they know that there will be a large percentage of the population that just shakes their heads and says, you're being a selfish person with this personal decision because you are. And this is why I have such an issue with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, to his credit, has basically gamed the system for the last 6 or 7 years because Washington stupidly handled his contract and franchise tagged him once and franchise tagged him again, and then he hit the open market, and that rarely happens with a healthy quarterback under 30. So he got $28 million a year from the Vikings, and then he restructured after a couple of years, and now he's getting more than $30 million a year from the Vikings. He's getting about $2 million a game, and he's not a $2 million a game quarterback, let's face it. And so he's content to not be vaccinated and to potentially test positive the day of a game, potentially have a close contact with an infected person the day before a game, and get paid his full $2 million and not play. That's what, with him specifically, that's what I have a problem with, because I don't care what your personal reasons are. This goes directly to your availability to earn money that you really aren't good enough to earn, if we're going to be honest about it. And that's what bugs me specifically about his situation.
Who can argue with that? I mean, the bottom line in the whole thing is that I believe, especially in the position of being an NFL quarterback, that no matter how strongly you feel about the vaccine, I just think it's a huge mistake to not get vaccinated. That one position in this game, I mean, all positions are valuable, obviously. All 53 players on the roster are valuable. But a starting quarterback, especially a starting quarterback who it's been proven time and again, when you look at the depth chart at quarterback, it's not like you've got a decent backup behind you. You don't. You might at some point, but you don't right now. It's exceedingly, you're just playing with fire.
And, you know, in this day and age of ever-spreading legalized sports betting, it's amazing that we don't have greater transparency as to which starting quarterbacks truly are and aren't vaccinated. And when you consider that it does go down to game day. It goes down to hours before kickoff. It's a fairly important piece of information if you're going to have your starting quarterback for that game, whether it's close contact, 5 days gone, positive test, 10 days gone, for probably 2 games if it happens on the day of a game that you test positive. I've seen photos from training camp, and you see different starting quarterbacks with masks on, and you kind of assume that if you're wearing a mask anywhere at practice, you're probably unvaccinated unless you're really, really, really cautious and wearing a mask outdoors even though you've been vaccinated, which I think is highly unlikely. But this absence of transparency is a problem for the NFL too, and I think at some point they have to ask themselves, do we have an obligation to the betting public in the states where it's legal now to wager on games? Is there an obligation, just like on the injury report, to say who and who isn't vaccinated, so we have an idea of the universe of guys on a given team who all of a sudden may not be available to play on Sunday, Peter?
Well, in an ideal world that had happened, but players, the union, would clearly claim HIPAA, and I think they would win.
HIPAA doesn't apply. HIPAA doesn't apply. No, HIPAA doesn't apply. It really is amazing, that there's so much transparency on everything else regarding a player's health, but on this, it's a guessing game.
I'm not really sure there is all that transparency in everything, because teams, no matter what the injury report says, teams hide injuries all the time. We see it every year.
Yeah, like a torn MCL for the entire season by Tom Brady.
In an ideal world, Mike, teams wouldn't hide injuries, but teams do hide injuries. And so therefore, I don't think there's any chance that the NFL would ever, I don't think the NFL would mind it if everybody knew, but I don't think the NFL would ever win at being able to put that on an injury report.
This is something we've never seen before, though, and it comes at a very weird time. And the idea that there is an unknown cluster of players on every roster who may be immediately and suddenly unavailable to play on the day of a game, and we don't know who they are. I don't think that's going to fly 2 weeks from now. As people begin to understand it, as Congress, men and women, begin to understand it, I don't think it's going to fly. And I don't know how the dominoes are going to fall, Peter, but as we get closer and closer to the games that count, I think there's going to be an uproar that people don't have this information available to them. We do know, though, in Buffalo, that pretty much everyone who is paid to catch a football has not been vaccinated. And someone told me the other day, like 7 Bills receivers aren't vaccinated. I don't know that that's the case, but we know of 2 who aren't vaccinated. One is Isaiah McKenzie, because he posted yesterday and doxed himself. There's his. Pay no attention to the email address. He posted it, though, on Twitter. He got fined by the league for not wearing a mask on 2 different occasions the day before. The league is not messing around. He mocked it. I mean, this isn't a guy who's making $10 million a year. $14,650 is a nice little chunk of change for anyone, but he doesn't seem to care. And that's the other side of this, Peter. If you're not going to be vaccinated, number one, you better follow every rule that's been put in place. And number 2, don't mock the process. You either get vaccinated, or you follow all the protocols, or you get the hell out. Those are the 3 choices.
Isaiah McKenzie seemingly made light of getting fined 1.5% of his annual compensation, which this year is $990,000. And judging by what we saw and how he treated this, I will not be surprised again if sometime in the next couple of weeks he gets fined again. Now, wouldn't it be a little bit different if Isaiah McKenzie made Michael Thomas money? Yeah, it would be, because then he wouldn't really have to worry about $14,650. But, and again, this sounds totally tone deaf with so many things going on in our country. But for a guy who makes $990,000 and is not even anywhere close to struck it rich in the NFL, wouldn't you think that wearing a mask around the complex to save you $14,650 would be the smart way to go? I mean, this casts a lot of light on Isaiah McKenzie, the person. I mean, is he trustworthy? You know, can Brian Daboll rely on him in the offense? I'm just that's a question. Maybe it's a silly question, but I really wonder about that after seeing this yesterday.
And, Peter, when you look at the Bills' receiver depth chart, he's at best number 6, especially when you consider how well Jake Kumaro has done this training camp. Now, for all I know, Kumaro's not vaccinated either. We know Beasley isn't because Beasley jumped on the train yesterday and said they got him too. And Beasley continues to bang this drum of, I don't get it, make it make sense. And it's really not that hard to understand what the NFL and the NFL Players Association have done here. You either accept what the rules are or you get off the train. And Beasley and McKenzie are two that seem to want to ride the train and complain about the ride the whole way. And if I'm McKenzie, and maybe he's just clueless, and maybe he's safer than I realize, and maybe it's because there's so many unvaccinated Bills that they're not going to cut guys who aren't vaccinated, but Tuesday is coming around the corner, and every roster goes from 80 to 53. And objectively, McKenzie is a guy, if you're on a team that is looking to increase your vaccine rate by shedding guys who aren't vaccinated, he would seem to be a guy who would be in far more trouble than Cole Beasley of not having a job come Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern.
Mike, let me tell you one thing. There's two things about what you just said. All right, number one, did you see what Brandon Beane said the other day in a press conference? He was asked about what had happened to his team, okay, and all of these new guys who were, who basically were away from the team because of this 5-day rule, essentially. And he said, and I quote, "We don't have it figured out. We don't have it under control. And we just have to deal with the cards that are dealt." Okay, so Mike, just imagine the general manager of a Super Bowl contender basically saying, hey, listen, we're going to do the best we can, but if we hit a streak of rotten luck, we are screwed. If they had to play a game today, just like the Tennessee Titans, if they had to play a game today, they are in big trouble. And let's talk for a second, about, basically about Isaiah McKenzie. When I was in their training camp, Mike, okay, it's very clear, obviously, Emmanuel Sanders, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley ahead of Isaiah McKenzie, okay? Then Gabriel Davis and probably Jake Kumaro are going to make this team, all right? And so there are 5 receivers right there. And I think that the Bills likely would keep 6. But that's why you just raised the point. Isaiah McKenzie, he's insurance for Cole Beasley in the slot. And I get it. He's somewhat valuable to this team. But I don't know what I would do if I were Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott right now. Would you keep him and risk this happening again? Would you keep him and risk him being a squeaky wheel about this process and being a distraction during the course of the year? Is a 5th or 6th receiver on the team worth that? The Bills are going to have to decide.
And, Peter, here's the other reality that may be unique to the Bills. Maybe the Vikings are in this camp as well. To the extent that players who remain after Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern believe that guys were cut because they're not vaccinated. Among the unvaccinated who are still there, they're going to be pissed off. Sorry, London. They're not going to be happy with that. Whereas in other cities, guys are going to say, okay, we get it. It was a close question. They want the guy who's vaccinated over the guy who isn't vaccinated. That's a no-brainer because it goes directly to availability and everything we've discussed over the last half hour. But in Buffalo, I think they are potentially teetering on the edge already of some sort of a revolt or the kind of dysfunction that can undermine your ability to win football games. It really is amazing. It is amazing to see a sport where everything is controlled and the analytics take every aspect of player evaluation into consideration. The idea that a couple of teams, for whatever reason, Vikings, Bills, and Colts to a certain extent, have a collection of guys that have a critical mass of players who just refuse to get the vaccination to the point where it is going to potentially cause them to lose football games this year, and they don't care.
I think upper management cares, ownership cares, coaches care.
Players don't.
But many players don't care. And really, we could have not a 2-hour show. We could have a 2-month show on what's happened to this country in the last 5 years. But all respect for authority is out the window. You're better off in a large sector of this country. You're better off getting your information from a TV host with a screed at 8 or 9 o'clock at night than you are listening to people who have been with the CDC and who've been doing this research for years and years. That's clearly what's wrong with our country right now, period. No. And it is obviously infecting the NFL.
And one of those networks that provides that misinformation ties directly back to an NFL broadcast partner, and you have to wonder how thrilled the folks at 345 Park Avenue are about that connection. With that, and for those of you out there who will email me saying, why are you talking about the vaccine? If you're not paying attention to what's going on in the NFL right now, not understanding how important it is to the game and why we spend a half hour on issues like this, you're not paying attention.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.